Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film Perfect Days, and we are joined by a very special guest, Michael from Screen Nerds Podcast. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. My name is Michael Burgett. I am the host of the Screen Nerds Podcast, and as I always like to say, it is a podcast for film lovers, by film lovers, and this is a film that I love, and I am so happy to be joining y'all today to discuss this film.
Yes, we are excited to dive into this conversation. What a film, and I think there's so much here to dig into, so this will be really fun to talk about together. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Perfect Days.
Hirayama cleans public toilets in Tokyo, lives his life in simplicity and daily tranquility. Some encounters also lead him to reflect on himself.
All right. So, in Movies and Us tradition, we will start off with our one-sentence summaries for the film Perfect Days. And as our guest, Michael, would you like to share your one-sentence summary first?
Sometimes a perfect day is simply appreciating the simple ones.
Yes. So good. So good. And kind of an amazing thesis of this film. So good. Sarah, do you want to share your one-sentence summary?
Mine is, the right music for your morning commute can change your whole day.
Yes. Indeed. Indeed it can. The power of music, man. All right. My one-sentence summary is, surely this is the antidote to chaos of modernity. Like 10 out of 10, right?
Yep. Well done.
All right. So let's start off with our high-level overview of our thoughts about the film Perfect Days. We will keep our thoughts very general in this first section, so we won't spoil this movie, and then we will include a spoiler alert right afterwards, and then we'll be able to dive into all the things. So, Michael, I'm intrigued to hear kind of your overview of thoughts about the film Perfect Days and what really stood out to you and kind of resonated to you in this film.
Yeah, really, to have to start out with why I even wanted to go see this film. And it goes back to Godzilla Minus One, which I was with y'all for that film. But for this film, it was nominated by the Japanese contingent of the Academy for Best International Film. And when I heard that, I was like, what is it about Perfect Days that it got nominated for this instead of Godzilla Minus One? And so I was like, okay, I have to see this film. And then when I saw the trailer for it, I was like, okay, I really need to see this film. And so when it came time for it to release in theaters, I went in with this expectation of, okay, this really has to be a good film for it to be chosen over Godzilla Minus One. Yeah. So when I went in and sat and watched the film, I was completely blown away by it, because it's not anything that you would expect, a Academy nominated film to be. It is, as this kind of was described in my one sentence summary. It's about simplicity. It's about just the mundane, but yet it's about celebrating the mundane and all the different complexities that come even out of just the routines that we go about on our daily lives. And so it just really just blew me away of how much was said with very little dialogue, how much was shown without, being, explosions or anything like that. It just simply was a quiet film, but it spoke so heavily in a lot of different ways. And it just really, I saw the film twice in the theater because I needed to go back and see it again just to catch things that I missed the first time, but just also just to really just to resonate with the film some more. And to me, that's what really drew me to this film after seeing it now twice, is that it speaks a lot of just appreciating the simple things.
So good. And it's funny to me that you mentioned Godzilla Minus One, because you joined us for our review of that episode, and this is just quite the meta narrative from a podcasting perspective. The two films could not be more different, and we get to talk about them together. It's great. I love it. I'm excited to dive into more of some of those things that really stood out to you and kind of resonated with you, especially on a second viewing. That's always a fascinating experience to see a movie a second time and see what else kind of emerges from the film that might not have gotten attention in the first time around. So I'm excited to talk about that with you. Sarah, tell us your thoughts about Perfect Days.
Yeah, no, I knew nothing really about this movie going into it, except I had seen a lot of praise for it, but I didn't really know what to expect. And I love that this is so kind of counter to what you would expect in a movie. There's no clear three arc structure. You know, you could argue that nothing really happens over the course of the film. There's not, a very clear plot. Like you said, Michael, there's not a lot of dialogue. And yet there's so much to this. It's such a simple movie, and yet it's complex at the same time. And I love the message, and, as a workaholic American, like this really resonates with me. It's a good reminder. But I also just love the way that this film is structured and the way that it builds upon itself over the course of the film. You think about our protagonist, and you make some assumptions about him, and then over the course of the film those just deepen, and you learn more about him. And the way that this movie kind of unfolds, I think, is really impressive. Again, it's so simple. You're just watching this dude as he goes about his life, but there's also a lot of meat there at the same time. So I think it's quite an achievement, and is a joy to watch. So I'm excited that we get to talk about this one together.
Yes, me too. I think this is a film that much of modern society should experience, and I mentioned this in my one sentence summary, but I left this feeling like, man, this really is the antidote of so much of what drives us, that we get fixated on in modern society, around the hustle and the grind and the pursuing and the stuff, and this film strips back so much of that. And I think as a film, for the first two thirds, it's already incredible, absolutely exceptional, and so meditative and quiet, and then the film does even more for me in the third section, the third act, where it deepens. It becomes much more nuanced and complex. I think this film on its surface is, a story about a man who is present and faithful to his commitments and living this quiet life. But actually, in the third section of this film, that third act, there's so much more that opens up in us getting to know who he is, and the way that he holds space for his emotions, and the way that he allows them to come and to experience them in all its complexity, I thought was just absolutely amazing. Like, I was already bought into this film at the 2/3 mark, but man, by the time we get to the end, and I'm excited to talk about that final shot of the film too, I was like, this is incredible filmmaking. It's some incredible acting as well. So this film kind of sold me already, and then just absolutely hit it out of the park for me by the end of the film. And so I'm excited to talk about some of those pieces as well. I think there's a lot of like themes and motifs throughout this film that continue to kind of thread its way throughout the film, that I think is also really poetic and fascinating as well. I'm fascinated, Michael, if there's some of those things that you picked up on the second time around, because I think that a second viewing, there's those themes would really pop out more and would deepen for me. But I was just kind of noticing them along the way, but was just kind of fascinated by and sucked into this world in general, that I didn't have as much space for those thoughts to just trickle and wander in those directions. But there's a lot of things that visually are cut together, and then thematically with the kind of topics and things that our protagonist is captivated by, that I think is interesting, around like trees and the organic nature of his environment. But then there's also this really like interesting theme around physical media versus digital media. There's so much there that I think could be interesting to talk about as well.
Yeah, one of the things that really, and I caught it really on the second time around, was how the day and the night flowed together. We have the daytime and his activities and everything that was going on. Everything's in color, but then when we get to the nighttime and he's sleeping, we have the dream sequences in black and white. And so it's that nice contrast of what's going on during the day and then what's going on at night. And it's also a helpful way of showing the progression of time, because again, these days seem to kind of flow together, and really it's that helpful little motif that goes between what happens with the daytime and the color, and then nighttime and black and white in the dream sequences. I thought that was a really cool way of helping us to see time progress in a unique way that sometimes some filmmakers use clocks, some use fast sequences of montages, but here it was just simple black and white frames and flashes to help us to see the time go from one day to the next. I thought that the director Wim Wenders did a great job with that.
Well, and it's so smart too, because I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just like me and my circle of people, but like days kind of blend together, and like time has lost all meaning in some ways. So I think it's
Mhm.
really smart, especially for this movie that is positioning itself as like a different way of living, and the fact that he has a clear delineation between days, and we're able to say, okay, this day has concluded, the next one has begun, I think is so smart, because I feel like one of the issues in our modern lives today is it can be difficult to experience those stops and starts because everything just blurs together.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and I think what was also really interesting visually about those sequences is like our dreams. I've been on a kick with reading about sleep. So this is me also just like multiple sides of my brain coming together, but so much of our dream states are processing the day, both like visually but also just more importantly emotionally processing the day. And so it was really fascinating to see how in each of those dream sequences there's different things that stood out to him in that day, faces of people that were kind of glimmers that he passed by, or were significant people in his life, or kind of visuals that really stood out to him in that day that are kind of flickering back and forth together. And I think also visually it was neat to see that there's obviously a lot of shots in this film of him observing shadows and kind of the flickering way that shadows play with light on a wall or on the ground. And the way the dream sequences visually look kind of echoed that feeling of flickering, the way that the trees and the leaves would flicker for him that he observed in the day. So I thought that was fascinating as well, that it kind of blends and fades between these different snapshots of his day, really.
And that the trees were so significant too that they warranted being part of his dream. I love that like the dream sequences is mostly trees, which is just so interesting, because how many times do we like look out the window or go on a walk and we don't actually notice the trees?
Yeah. And I would have to watch this again to notice this a little bit more, but I noticed, especially in the second half of the film, that in days where he seemed to be more troubled, there was more stress in his life, there's more going on. I noticed that his dream sequences would have a lot more visuals of these like grid-like structures and less organic. So I don't know if there's something there around like his mental capacity and time and ability to notice and to be present in those moments and find the beauty that he had, in the beginning of the film, where his life is a little bit more peaceful and it gets a little bit more chaotic as the film goes on. That his what he notices or where his brain latches to kind of shifts as well. There are a lot more shots of like walls and very like parallel grid like lines and structures, and less of the organic. But I mean, just this is maybe purely correlation, but it was a little thing that I noticed.
I think part of it is when we look at Harayama and his life and the way he goes about it, he's very much an analog man in a digital world. Like we see that with how he interacts with nature and enjoys that, and we see that with what he uses as far as like physical media, whether it's books or cassettes or whatever it is that he uses. He really is kind of a throwback to life and just enjoying it as it comes along. And I think that also too is one of the things that I appreciated about this film is how he he appreciates and enjoys those simple things. And it was a good reminder to me to do that myself, to take time to just look outside, and as I'm sitting outside, and just look around at nature, and see those shadows, see the wind blow through the trees and the leaves and the branches, and really just take that all in, and take that moment to just think about what's going on. And so that was another thing too I really appreciated about how this film kind of speaks to, sometimes it's good to unplug for a bit and just really just enjoy the moment and enjoy the surroundings that you're in.
Yeah, that whole theme around digital versus physical media is really really interesting. There's several times throughout the film where I think this film is set in 2023 for our protagonist. And I kind of forgot, because we spent so much time in this world with him, and so much of, even in his home and his space, there is very little presence of digital technology. And it's only in moments where he's with other people, like when he's with his coworker and his coworker's like on his phone as he's in the middle of scrubbing a toilet. You're like, oh, like this is he is living in the modern age, and has chosen and created a life and cultivated a life that is free from so much of those places that people get sucked into. And I think it's interesting. There's a few shots throughout the film too where you see his surroundings and the people around them, whether they're at the park and they're on their phones, or like hunched down on their phones, or they're on the train or in a car and they're on their phones. And I thought that contrast was almost like a shocking reminder to me every time of like, oh no, he is a, like you mentioned, Michael, an analog man in a digital world. Because I honestly, in so many moments, just forgot what era we're in. And I think it's specifically that scene with his niece where they're talking about Spotify, and he's like, "Oh, what shop is that?" I thought that was just a sweet moment to show, one, the kind of the generational divide, but two, just truly the cultivation of this man's life that has been free from so much of the the kind of getting sucked into the digital realm. And it's fun too to see some of the other characters, like the coworker's girlfriend, really like get captivated by and appreciate his cassette collection, and find joy in that. And I think you see that in the younger generation today. Like Gen Z is so excited about vinyl records and Polaroid cameras. There is kind of this circular looping back to this appreciation of analog and physical media, which I think is also interesting to think about in a larger sense as well.
There was one thing I wanted to make sure that to discuss before we got into the spoilery part, and that's the making of this. I don't know if y'all know about how this movie came about. Did y'all hear anything about how this film was made or how it came about?
No, not yet. Do share. Sarah, what about you?
No, I read a little bit of it afterwards, but yes, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, so I didn't either until after I saw the film, but initially this was supposed to be a kind of documentary, because the the public toilets in Tokyo, were to be prominently displayed and celebrated during the 2020 Olympics. And as we all know, the pandemic hit. The Olympics happened a year later, but with no fanfare, no crowds, no nothing. And so the people that were kind of behind this initiative to celebrate these public bathrooms wanted to find a way to still do that. And so the head marketing person decided that they wanted to make a film. Initially, it was to make like documentary, like short films about these different toilets. I think he said there were like 9 that they wanted to talk about and show off and promote to the world just how wonderful these toilets were. And they are. I mean, we see the film, we see how great they are. But they were like trying to come up with ideas of directors of who could direct this, and they had a wish list. And on that wish list was directors like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg, and your favorite Jen, Martin Scorsese. And Vim Vendors, and so he was also on
Mm.
that wish list. And they talked to Vim, and Vim has a connection with Tokyo. At one time, he did a documentary about one of the directors from Tokyo, and was a fan of his, and so he loves the country, loves the city, and so he went and did some scouting of it and decided, no, let's not make a documentary, let's make an actual feature film. And so he worked with a screenwriter. It took 3 weeks, only 3 weeks, to do the screenplay for this film, and then they did 17 days worth of shooting. So it was a quick production that was done.
Wow.
And one of the things when I said that when I was watching for the second time to kind of
Mm.
catch was how many quote unquote days go by in the film. And there are technically 12 days. I think the 12th day is the start of at the end of the film. But to think about how short of a turnaround there was with the screenplay, with the filming, and what we end up with, which they debuted this film at the Cannes Film Festival, and it won for what was the best independent film, and the actor Koji Yashuko won for best actor. So it was, it was well received even immediately. And then obviously, as I said, it was the Japanese selection for Best International Film and was nominated and then ended up losing the Zone of Interest. But it's a film that, went from humble beginnings of, being what could have been a documentary about the public toilets in Tokyo to this narrative film that, we get to celebrate and talk about here.
Wow, that's incredible. I feel like it is that that thread line of the toilets and kind of the visuals of them. I mean, I was entertained to see what the next toilet was, the architecture behind them, and even some of those little features, especially in the little scene where he teaches one of the other women how it works with when you lock the door. It kind of goes from a transparency tone to kind of pure opaque. It's fascinating. So that they've accomplished that goal for sure, and yet so much more. And I just hearing you share about that, wonder how much more eyeballs and kind of and reach that this film is able to have as a narrative feature fiction film versus a documentary, a short film documentary. The ability for them to reach audiences with their original thesis, and then also this kind of higher level, human level thesis is really fascinating to think about as well. But yeah, those humble beginnings is fascinating to see the type of art that's created from just, hey, we want to showcase this really great aspect about our city, to so much more that this film is also able to accomplish as well. I would love to have seen the Quentin Tarantino version of this movie. Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Imagination run wild on that one.
Yeah.
Well, when I was thinking of when I saw Martin Scorsese attached to it, and you did Mean Streets, I was like, well, you could have Clean Streets with this one.
There you go.
I love it. 50 some years later, Scorsese comes out with Clean Streets. It's the final pinnacle of his career. Great. I love it.
Yeah, it'd be a little different vibe for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's include a spoiler alert here. If you haven't seen Perfect Days, if you couldn't tell yet, we highly recommend checking out this film before listening to the rest of this episode. Very much well worth your time to experience all that this film has to offer. All right. So we have full free reign to talk about anything that happens in this film in more detail. So where do we want to go first? Where are some other aspects of this film, whether it's specific scenes or moments or maybe themes that really kind of stood out to you and resonated with you?
I think for me, what really resonated with me personally was the time that Hirayama spent with his niece. We see, and that's, about halfway through the film. Like we see him in his normal routine. He's going through everything. Essentially a week or so has passed that that we come to this point where his niece who ran away from home, ends up on his front doorstep essentially, who, he probably hadn't seen in years. And he has this, 2-day roughly interaction with her. And it's the point where he actually talks the most, because the majority of the film, Hirayama doesn't really talk. Like he may say one line here, one line there, but really it's this interaction that he has with his niece is really, I think, the point where he opens up, and we get to see a lot more of what's going on inside of his head. Because a lot of times we just have the expressions of what he's thinking, but really when he's with his niece, that's really when he kind of opens up and starts to have conversations about kind of a little bit like pulling back the curtain of, kind of who he is outside of work. And I think really that relationship, it really kind of struck with me because I have a niece, and so I kind of can relate in that aspect of that, and just how that relationship is in the film, and in my relationship with my niece. And sometimes we get to talk a lot, sometimes we don't. It just kind of depends. And I think for me that's those scenes really kind of resonated with me above all the other ones. Not to say that any of the other ones didn't resonate with me, but really those just kind of resonated with me. It's just how that really kind of emotionally opened him up that we didn't really see in other parts of the film leading up to that.
Well, and you see him not just saying words, and obviously he does say a lot of words, comparatively speaking, when he's with her, but you see also his emotions too, when they're on the bikes and she starts kind of like singing, chanting a little song while they're riding, and then he echoes her, so he's singing this silly song with her. Or when his sister comes to finally pick her up, even though there's kind of a rift between them, then he hugs his sister. So you see not only just him opening up verbally, but also him opening up emotionally, and we're seeing these different sides of him that we haven't seen as he's just going about his normal day, going about his work. And so I just love the way that this film is structured to give us those little moments, because that time with his niece is also just after he spends time in the bar, and he's kind of flirting with that woman, and that's a side of him that we've never seen before either. So we just get to know him in these different contexts throughout the film, and by the end we don't fully know him, but we do have a pretty good sense about what he's about. And I just love the way that we just kind of peel back the layers scene by scene. And I thought that was really beautiful and strategic, the way that the film is structured to get us to that point by the end.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it really does a great way of kind of setting things up, because when we start out with the film, we're introduced to him, and we're introduced to him at work. And that's kind of how we see him, as his job is he cleans public toilets. That's his job. And so we see him in his workspace and in his daily routine. And then we get to the end of the weekend, or the end of the week, where, he does his weekend things. And I love the fact of how it's structured, because then, like you said, Sarah, it sets up those moments where, we think it's going to go one way, and then life has its way of veering left. And how does Hirayama react to it? And so having the baseline of how he goes about his normal routine, and then seeing how that normal routine is upended, whether it's by, coworker not doing his job, or his niece showing up unexpectedly, or it's flirting with Mama, the owner of the restaurant. It's like all these different things that, if you just had those scenes on their own, they're great, but having them in the context of where they are in the structure of the film makes it even better, because it really opens up more of who he is and what he's about personally, but then also the world around him.
And I think that contrast is so palpable and significant in this film because we have spent nearly two-thirds of the film in this more tranquil state, and not much is shaking his world. He's kind of going about his day, and we are already, like living this life with him day in and day out. So when those moments of emotion come, they feel significant. I think film in general and storytelling in general like leans into all of the emotions that we experience in life, right? And that's part of the goal, is for it to explore and kind of saturate and expand those emotions for us to like feel them and dive into them in films. And so a lot of times in a film we start off like, on this journey, we feel every emotion with the character, but it's almost like the absence of the emotion at the beginning really makes the moments that when the emotion hits, it feels so significant. So we've seen him take his drive to work every day for so many drives up until the ending shot of the film. And so he's often, listening to his music, he's going about his day. It's quaint, tranquil, it's calm, it's peaceful. And so that last ending shot where he's also going to work, which we've seen him do a million times beforehand, but there's these waves of emotions just washing over him. They feel like such a big contrast to all of the other drives that we've done. And I feel like life is so much like that, like so many days are you're just, faithful to your responsibilities, doing what you need to do. And then there's days where every possible emotion you're experiencing in a single day. And that is more kind of like aligned to or kind of resonant for the way that like our lives operate versus, from the beginning we are off to the races with all of the emotions and the melodrama and whatnot. This film really accentuates the emotion by creating such a feeling of peacefulness and stability for so long in the film. So we've seen this character do the same activities, but now something is very different by the end of the film.
One of the things that I really loved and appreciated, and I noticed it a lot in the second viewing, was how even the similar things that happen in each of Hirayama's days, whether it's him getting up in the morning, walking outside the door, going over to the machine to get his coffee, to getting into the van, to driving, to doing his normal routine, the cinematography is shot differently for every single day. So even when you see those same things that happen in his day that are routine, they're all seen for us as the viewer from different angles and different perspectives. And so I thought that that was really cool, is that even with things that happen literally every day, we see it from a different viewpoint, from a different perspective, and it just really adds to kind of that like the symbiosis almost of the the viewer to what's going on, and also just how, you know even though there are things that happen in our days every day, there's still a little bit of uniqueness to them. That as we interact with the day, it may be something that we do every day that's part of our routine, but something about it could be a little bit different, and seeing it from that little different perspective, it just really impressed me of how Vim Vendors was able to do that in just a simple way like that, of just showing something how it's just routine, but yet it's still done in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I loved that too. And I think it's so smart to keep us as the viewers also engaged. I think if you want to shoot something and you're trying to show that it's mundane and the character is bored, then you'll shoot it the same way multiple times and cut those all back to back, and then we'll feel the monotony of that task or the monotony of that routine. But because the camera angles are always a little bit different, that keeps us engaged and us interested. And I don't know, like Hirayama is so interesting to me. Like I wanted to know more about him because his life was so simple. I was like, oh my gosh, tell me more. And so I was just inspecting the frame the whole time. Like, what clues are in here? What else can I discover about who this person is? So all of those different camera angles I thought were really, really smart to help me stay engaged instead of checking out of like, oh, I've seen this before. Let's go on to something else. So smart for our modern brains that are just constantly distracted.
Another note on the cinematography is the contrast between the world that Hirayama kind of has created and cultivated for himself in his home and his space, his oasis, and then the minute he's in the city, the cuts are much more rapid paced. There's a lot more shaky cam versus when we start out the film. There's a lot more really slow, still shots. It almost feels like this rhythmic way to get us to be in his world by understanding the moods that he is in, the environments that he is in. Obviously, when you're in the city, there's a lot more stimulation, a lot more noise, a lot more going on, versus when he's in his own space. It feels like every time we get back to his home, I'm like, oh, we can just breathe out a sigh of relief to not be kind of surrounded by everything else happening around you in your urban environment. And so it was cool to see the way that the cinematography also like mirrors that sense of space and environment, based on how quick the cuts are and kind of the shakiness and camera angles. There's especially, I think, in the first time that we see him at his job on the first day, there's a lot of like the camera following him as he's cleaning the toilets and a lot more shaky cam. And it's such a contrast to the beginning of the film that is so slow and willing to spend time and space, in the kind of the wake up morning routine for a protagonist. And then the minute he's at work, you're kind of in that different mindset, different headspace. So it really helps us empathize with him as a character as well. It's really cool.
I think one of the things too is how Hirayama goes into the day, with music. And that's one of the prominent things throughout the film is how music speaks to Hirayama's mindset or just the mood that he's in. Is that every morning he pops in a particular cassette, and it's not happenstance of whichever one he chooses. He will make sure before he leaves to look for the right cassette that he wants to listen to for the day and make sure he puts it in and then goes from there. And I think that's one thing too about how the music helps us as the viewer to set our expectations of where we are in the film and what's going on by what Hirayama's listening to. And truth be told, he has a pretty good music collection of what he listens to. It's really great music from 60s and 70s, and that's probably his formative years was what he was listening to then, and he still listens to it to this day, and it really speaks to him as a person and how he interacts with life and everything is in that way through his music. And so I love the soundtrack as well. I thought that they really picked great songs that spoke to whatever scene it was that it was being played in, as well as speaking to Hirayama and his journey that we go throughout the course of the film.
Oh, it was so good. Like, I personally have been on an Otis Redding kick right now. So when Sitting on the Dock of the Bay came on, I was like, yes, my guy, let's go. Let's conquer this day. But you're right. The music does such a good job of just setting the tone for the day, and it's almost this it's part of his ritual that he goes on, which, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but like I go through the same ritual. I'm like, what's the vibe for today? What are we listening to? What do we need to conquer this day? So again, it was this like empathy building too. Like, even though he doesn't know what Spotify is and he's not using Spotify, he is still going through that same process of like, what is the soundtrack for my day? What do I want to listen to really enjoy this moment? And a lot of us do that, and I loved that choice to keep us engaged and keep us interested in what's going on and give us a fun song in the background, but also to help us build even more empathy with this character who lives so differently than we do.
Yeah, when I heard "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay," that one just hit me in all the feels.
Oh,
That's one of my
so
favorite
good.
songs. And so when I heard that one, I thought it was just so good. And that was probably my favorite one out of the entire soundtrack. But I mean, you had Lou Reed, you had Patti Smith, you had the
Mm-hmm.
Kinks. You even had the Stones. So I mean, he had such a great collection there that he was listening to, and it is just a good reminder of, some songs are just timeless, and they just have that feeling or way that resonates with you, whether you're young or old, or wherever stage of life you're in. And so that was one thing that I just really enjoyed, was just hearing Otis Redding blaring out in the theater. It was just like, just all the right feels.
Well, and I really wonder how many people maybe don't know what cassette tapes are, number one, and are being exposed to them for a first time watching this movie, which is kind of scary to think about, but also how many people could be introduced to all of this really great music because of this movie. So Perfect Days is just doing a public service for all of us right here.
Well, apparently in Japan, it's a huge thing of cassettes, because we see with one scene about the one
Right.
store that sells all these used cassette tapes, and so it's thriving in Tokyo, that's for sure.
What I also love about the cassette tapes is how it's such a conduit for him to connect with other people. I feel like there's such a, in modern society, everyone's like thirsting and longing for that human connection, and you feel that with him too. Like, I think, somebody asks him, I think his coworker says, like, are you lonely? And you see how much he has formed these sweet human relationships in the shop owners and the people that he commonly frequents. But I love that scene where his coworker's girlfriend is so moved by the song and the music that she listened to in his car, and asks him to be able to listen to it again. And you see her face, there's a very close-up shot of her face as you see her kind of like taking it in and just soaking in that song, and how much that meant to her, that she kind of thanked him for, with the peck on the cheek, and he's like startled by it. But it is a kind of like really neat little moment for this person that spends so much of his time alone, that this was a way to usher in this like connection with other people. And there's a small little scene with his niece as well, where they talk a little bit about music and whatnot, and she's also inspecting and admiring his cassette tapes. So it was just neat too to see the way that his personal passions for this thing ushers in the ability for him to connect with other people and form those relationships.
Yeah, and it's also funny too how all these different people, when they get in the truck and they're wanting to play the cassettes, and they start trying to put it in the wrong way, and he goes and like, especially the time when Takashi and Aya are sitting in the front seats and he's in the back, and they're trying to stick the tape in the wrong way, and he like reaches over to put it in the right way. Both those scenes where he did that with them and then with his niece just kind of cracked me up, because it's like, no, there's a certain way you put this in. You can't put it in the wrong way, otherwise you'll mess it up. But I have to talk about Takashi, the coworker, because he is 10 out of 10 the worst character in the film. Like,
Yes.
he's the worst. And the thing is too, and this is one of the things when I saw it in the second viewing, of just how terrible he is, because in the first showing of the film, like, you just see him, and he's a coworker. He shows up late. He,
Mm-hmm.
like y'all said, he's on his phone half the time, so he's not really taking his job seriously as far as cleaning. He, when he wants to clean, he'll do it, like whenever, like, there's, somebody to impress or whatever, then he'll do it. But otherwise, he just, he's very lackadaisical. He just really doesn't care. He takes advantage of Takashi's. Takashi takes advantage of Hayayama's, sincerity and kindness, to borrow the truck to take him and Anya driving. and then to drop her off at her place of work, and then wants to take Hayayama's cassette tapes to the cassette store to sell them so that he can have money to go take his girlfriend on a date, because he doesn't have money in his own right. And so he does these things, and it's just, oh, he's the worst. And then in the end, he quits his job. He leaves Hayayama uh, out hanging by himself, that he has to pick up all of this work. And the scene that to me really stuck out is Hayayama is the worst, was we get introduced at one point to this special needs kid who finds Takashi regularly whenever he's working or whatever, and has this endearing moment of like playing with Takashi's ears, and there's this like kind of nice moment. And in the first watching of the film, it's like, oh, okay, he is, he's not this really bad, horrible person. He's a nice guy because he spends time with this kid. But as we come to find out, he quits the job, leaves Hayayama hanging. And at one point at that night, whenever Hayayama's cleaning, this kid comes in thinking he's going to find Takashi, and he doesn't. And it's just that sadness, that expression on the kid's face. It gutted me. And the second time I saw the film, I was like, Takashi is the
Yeah.
worst.
Yeah, no, I think he's this important character. One, obviously, he's a clear foil to Hirayama. Just the restless energy of this dude is so palpable the first minute he's on screen. But I think it's also like such a great um way to showcase that, like, as there's so much like little moments of kindness that Hirayama exhibits throughout the film with all kinds of strangers around him. And I think that there's like the alternate version of this film that like really kind of leans into that and showcases how much that kindness is appreciated, and there's this really great human moment and connection and whatnot. But I kind of love that this film is like, Hirayama is so humble and willing to give and willing to be generous and be kind. And not everybody is going to appreciate and see that for what it is. And yet he still continues to. He's not jaded by it. He doesn't become cynical and hard because of it, but continues to give so freely. And I think that is, it's more of a testament to who Hirayama is. And he's frustrated. He's not like this angelic being. He's frustrated when he has to work like literally till night to cover for Takashi's shift. But you see that he continues to hold space for other people, to give and to exhibit that kindness, even when he's got coworkers like this that really kind of throw it in his face a little bit. And I thought that was a significant part of like the balanced nature of this film that could have easily become maybe a little bit too saccharine. And this film is very grounded, very clear-minded about how the world works and who these people are, and who our protagonist specifically is. And so in that way, Takashi's really kind of a significant way to bring out these sides of our protagonists that are significant and important to recognize. So yeah, he is the worst, but he makes our main character really shine because he is the worst and kind of gets taken for granted a little bit.
And that's one thing too. In that one scene, we've already talked about it, when the girlfriend Aya is sitting there with Hayayama listening to the music, and she asked the question of, did Takashi tell you what happened? And we don't, obviously he doesn't respond as to whether he did or didn't, or we don't even know necessarily what all Takashi told Hayayama, because that's a scene, off camera. But just the fact of, that scene to me really kind of spoke not only to how Takashi treated Hayayama, but also Aya as well. And that, these two characters are sitting in this truck, and they both can relate to how they've been treated by Takashi, because of just, whether it's being used in the sense of, work, or being used in the sense of a relationship. And so I thought that was a really interesting scene too, as well, because they're essentially two strangers that connected through music and through this one guy who, as we've discussed, is the worst. So I thought that was a really good scene too. And also, like you mentioned, how the reaction that Takashi gets out of Hayayama, it's like we see that, he's a real person. He's not just a two-dimensional figure. We also see the frustration that comes out in the conversation on the phone that he has with work, with, this is unacceptable, this can't happen again. And then we also, we see later on how he gets a coworker. And that's one of the things I'd love if there ever was a Perfect Days 2, would be this relationship that we see further with this new coworker, because this new coworker looks like someone, she looks like she would be perfect for the job, and that they feel like they get along really well. And so I'd love to see that sequel where they're working together and having a great time and getting the job done.
Yeah, she is ready for business. She's like, where do I go? Let's go. There's no like, hi, how are you? What's your name? No, she's like, tell me where I need to go. I'm ready to work. Well, your mention of that scene with Aya and kind of just the brief mention of like basically there's more that has happened, and yet we will never know, and the film's not interested in showing it to us. I think it's a really amazing part of this film that I really appreciate it, because I think a lot of films kind of can over explain, and we get all the details of all the backstory of everything, and there's a similar scene with Nico and her mother, and that whole scene where she gets picked up, where there's insinuation of someone named Victor and something that happened to him, and I think she says like, I don't want the same thing to happen to me that happened to Victor, and you can see that for this family, we don't know who he is. Is it her brother? Is it her cousin? We have no idea. I would assume it's her
That's the
brother, but
character in the book that she's reading. She borrows a book from
oh,
Hayayama, and that's the
okay.
main character in the book. And she, at one point she
I see.
says, "I relate to Victor,"
Him.
being the character in the book. And so that's when she says, she doesn't want to, end up like that. And that's where that comes from.
Okay. Then I read that. I forgot that detail, and I read that scene differently. But the the way that the film just like will include that and not need to explain, like we don't know anything about Nico really. We don't know anything about her family dynamic, but it's all kind of shown to us. There's a literal like chauffeur that shows up like with her mother. We can sense that there's a lot of history that has gone down in this family, and the film is showcasing the effects of it without having to explain all of the things that had gone down between, say, Hirayama and his sister. Like there's conversations about it, but we actually don't know the details. And the film's kind of like, this is not important. What's important is the effects and the way that this character faces it, deals with it today, and all that kind of stuff. There's a presence of more without having to show us all of it, which I really love that about this film.
Yeah, it really does a good job of just posing questions and leaving the questions out there and leaving the interpretation of the answers up to you. Like with that scene with the sister and Hayama, there's the discussion of, there being a falling out with the family, and, that the father, or his dad, is ill, and there's an opportunity for Hayama and to go see him, and he says, he chooses not to, at least at that particular moment. But we don't know, why there was a falling out, why there's this, rift in the family. But, one could think that, with Nico running away and, kind of connecting these two again, because we don't know how long it's been since the brother and sister have been together. This could be years since they've, had any kind of conversation. And so, this could be the start of something, that mends fences, and there's so many elements of this film where it's very much like an art piece. It's up for interpretation, like how the viewer and their experiences and their, life story watches this film can see, what's going on and have an idea of, what they think happened in the past and what could happen in the future, it could be completely different than somebody else that watches this film. And I think that, for a lot of films, this wouldn't be something that works very well, because you have questions and you need to have answers by the end of the film. But I think for this film, I think it's a good thing that it does that, because it just leaves so much for interpretation, that it's okay that there's not answers to it, because there's not a right or wrong answer. It's almost like a multiple choice kind of a question, or even an essay kind of a question, that it could be, interpreted as one thing or another thing, and just how it's played out, we see it in that kind of format. And yeah, I really do appreciate how that's done by the director.
Yeah, you can take away from it what you want, and like what you are interested in or what resonates with you, you can find in that, and you can kind of explore that. I was so interested in how Hirayama ended up in this space, and I take it from his sister showing up with a chauffeur, that she is well off. And so in my head canon of his past, he had money and he's given that up to pursue this more simple life. And I think for me, like that makes this character more interesting. But you don't have to accept that interpretation. And it's not because the screenwriting is bad, or because lazy storytelling, but it's actually, I think, the opposite. And it's this intentional ambiguity to get you to engage with the parts of this movie that resonate with you the most. And it gives you the boundaries, it gives you some options, and then you can kind of play and piece things together from there. And I think that's really fun, and really respects us as the audience to do that work if we want to. And you also don't have to. You can just take everything at face value and still really enjoy the movie. So I think that's really special that this movie was able to pull all of that off with such quality.
All right. Any other thoughts, reactions, big themes that we wanted to hit on before we wrapped up?
There's two quick things I wanted to bring up. One is a question, and the other is just an observation. I'll do the observation first.
Okay, perfect.
The way that Hirayama takes photos just boggles my mind, because he obviously, we talk about him being an analog man. He uses a regular film camera, so he in his daily routine goes to the store on the weekends to pick up the film and to drop off the film that he'd taken from the previous week or whatever. But he takes photos not looking through the viewfinder. Like, he just holds it up there at a certain angle, and then he takes the photo, and then we get to the end of the week, and he's looking through his photos, and it almost is like for the first time seeing what he actually took. And if it's a good photo, he puts it in his tin, and if it's not, he just tears it up and throws it to the side. And I just wonder, like, why does he do it that way? Is it just he thinks if he looks through a viewfinder, it takes away from the aspect of viewing it in real time, or it's just the way he angles it, he thinks he gets a better shot? I don't know, but that just was a very interesting way of taking photos. Like, if it's a digital camera, I could see doing that, because hey, you have infinite space if you clear it out every so often, and you're not it's not costing you anything to take photos that way. Whereas if you're doing it the film development way, there were a decent amount of photos that got tore up because the lighting wasn't right, or the way the angle was. And I don't know, that was an observation for me for that. And then the question, and it's one that after two viewings, I still don't know for sure what the correct answer is. But we talked about him going to the cassette, the record cassette store, and Takashi was trying to sell particularly a Lou Reed cassette because it was like $100 or whatever. And, Hayayama ends up giving him money instead from his wallet. And we, see Hayayama going home, and he runs out of gas. And he's standing outside there, and he fiddles around in his pocket, and he pulls out the Lou Reed tape. Now, does he actually go and sell the tape to get the money to go pay for the gas, or does he not?
Yeah, in my mind, he sold it.
Yeah, that was my headcanon too.
See, I thought that after my first viewing, but then when I watched it the second time, I could have swore when he was messing around with his wallet, when he's standing outside of his car, that he actually still had money in there. But that he was just looking at his tape of like, oh, I wouldn't have had to have gone through this if I didn't have to deal with Takashi or whatever. But that he didn't actually sell the tape. But I'm not for sure. But that was one of those things. It's one of those questions. It doesn't really, because we don't actually see him go back to the store to sell it. So it's one of those. It doesn't really, it's there's not a clear cut answer. But that was one thing too that was just like, did he really sell the tape?
Especially because they're so precious to him, like he handles them so gingerly that you're like, did you really part with it? I had just assumed that he did, but I think that the fact that there is an open-ended question there is kind of really fun too. Okay. Well, this was our review and discussion of the film Perfect Days. You can find it available out in some theaters still, and I believe on some streaming platforms as well. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us, and a big thank you to you, Michael, for suggesting this film and coming on to talk about it with us. It's been so great to hear all of your thoughts. Where can people find more of you and your thoughts and perspectives on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me anywhere you get your podcast just by searching Screen Nerds Podcast. You can find me on the socials on Twitter at Screen Nerds Pod. And then on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, just by searching Screen Nerds Podcast. And again, thanks, Jen and Sarah. It was a lot of fun talking about this film. Obviously, we could have just gone on for hours talking about it, but it was just such a great time to get together with y'all again and talk and just really celebrate this film, because that's what it's about, is finding good films like this and celebrating them.
Yes, exactly. And I think we've got these platforms and places and spaces to be able to hold conversation about these films and celebrate them and praise them and encourage everyone to go see it. So Michael is no stranger to the pod. You can hear more of him on some of our past episodes as well. And we're excited to continue to celebrate movies as film lovers together. All right, well, our name, Movies and Us, sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with all of us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Perfect Days. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at Movies and Us Pod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week with another film review. We'll be discussing the movie All of Us Strangers. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you again next week.